Good morning, good afternoon, happy Friday. Welcome to another video. If you're new here, my name is Erika Jane. Today, we are going to be making some bread. And I'm going to walk you through the process of how I make my favorite bread recipe. It is easy, versatile. You can make it whole wheat, you can make it white, you can make it cheesy, you can make it spicy. There are so many options with this loaf, so let's just jump right into it. So for this recipe, you're gonna need 1 tablespoon of yeast, and this recipe works well with both active and dry instant yeast. So whatever you have on hand, it is okay. It will work for sure. Instant yeast is just gonna have a quicker rise to it, and active dry yeast usually takes a bit longer. So instant yeast you could use to make like pizza dough like immediately. Yeah, then you're gonna need a little bit of salt, just a bit, and this is actually going to feed the yeast. So depending if you're making it like a salty loaf or if you just kind of want it like a sandwich loaf, I would range from a 1/4 teaspoon to a full teaspoon of salt. And then you're going to need 2 tablespoons of something sweet. Now, when I say something sweet, I mean either cane sugar, maple syrup, you could use honey, you could use date syrup, whatever really suits you and your needs best. I personally go back and forth between honey and maple syrup. I find the honey we use does add a little bit of a flavor, like it's almost like a sweeter nutty. I don't know how that makes sense, but there's a little bit of a taste to it. And if you're looking for something that maybe blends in a bit more, I would try maple syrup or cane syrup, or just regular cane sugar, or regular white sugar as well. And then you're going to need 1.5 cups of warm water. And if you have a temperature, if you have a thermometer, amazing. You're gonna want it to be at 110 degrees Celsius. And if you don't have a thermometer on hand, which I often don't use mine, I usually check once there's like the little bubbles that kind of start coming up in the water, not when it's boiling, but like you can tell it's warm. Kind of like bath water, like your hand should be comfortable in it. Then we need the flour. And the thing with the flour here is you can adjust this quite a bit. So depending on the type of loaf you're actually trying to make, you can use all-purpose flour. You can use half all-purpose flour, half whole wheat. You could use some all-purpose, some whole wheat. You could use fife wheat. You could use oat flour. The options are really endless. What I like to do is do about 2 to 3 cups of white flour and do the other 1 to 2 cups of whole wheat or red fife wheat. And I find this just gives it, like the fife wheat particular, gives it a nice like nutty flavor. But then having some whole wheat, you don't feel like you're just eating like, I don't know, white bread isn't totally healthy for you. So this does just break it up a little bit and give you some more fiber. And yeah, that's about it for ingredients. Super simple recipe. You're gonna want to knead this now for, I usually try and aim for 10 minutes, but the test really is when you can pull your dough apart and if it doesn't rip. So that's called the gluten window. So kneading it is actually going to build up gluten in your dough and it's going to prevent it from ripping. So in the video I previously made, you can tell that I did not knead it long enough just by looking at the dough. Now, if you were to look at this and how I'm kneading it here, you can tell it is night and day different just in the texture of the bread. And this is going to affect the crumb of your bread. Just, I don't know, it's going to make your bread a lot nicer depending on how much you knead it. Less air pockets, less things like that. I don't totally know all the science behind it, but you can't really over knead. That's one thing I've learned. You can't over knead your bread. So if you have a stand mixer, amazing, because it is hard on your arms. Use your little dough hook and just put it in on low and just let it go. If you don't have a stand mixer, which I don't, I'll show you here, and we can just knead together. It's a workout. put your dough back into your bowl, and you're gonna wanna cover this and leave it on your counter now for 2 hours. After this, pretty easy, this next step, you're gonna transfer it from the counter into your fridge for another 2 hours. Now, if you don't have time to leave it on the counter, you could speed it up and put it directly in the fridge, hypothetically, but I find the counter rise really makes the difference. And you'll see, just like when you do it yourself, it'll probably double in size. And then once you finish rising in the fridge, you're gonna take the dough out, and this is where you would add any add-ins. So if you were gonna add any cheese, if you were gonna add any spices, if you were making like a seeded oaty type of bread, you would knead it into your bread now. And then you're gonna prepare a baking sheet or a loaf. So I go back and forth. If I'm looking for a sliced bread, like sandwich type of bread, I'll do a loaf pan. But lately we've been doing the round loaves a lot because they're just fun to eat, and they're great when they're cheesy, and you can just like put a little olive oil, little spices, dip it in. It's just great. It's just delicious. We were doing that quite often, and then we stopped because it's just like we were eating so much bread. So it's delicious. Next, yeah, so after you've got that all kneaded in, put on your baking sheet. You're gonna wanna preheat your oven, if it goes this low, to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And if it doesn't go that low, feel free to just like turn it on, and then like once it gets to that temperature, turn it off. And you're gonna wanna put your dough in there to rise for about 40 minutes, give or take, sometimes half an hour. You'll be able to tell it gets quite big, quite fast. And for this part, I do like to put just a metal dish in the bottom rack of the oven, and I leave that filled with water, so that just adds moisture and it helps the bread from drying out when it's baking. And when you're actually, okay, let's backtrack a little bit. Before you put the dough in the oven for this proofing part, you're gonna wanna cover it in some oil. Now, I use olive oil usually for our bread, but you're just gonna want like a neutral oil or an oil that you like the taste of. And that's just gonna prevent it from drying out, because your crust will get quite dry if you don't, which is fine. I have seen people do egg washes as well. It'll just make it like a little bit crispier. Last, but certainly not least, you're going to want to score the bread. Now, this is important because it's actually going to let some of the steam come out from the dough. So you'll be able to tell when it starts to rise too fast, and if there aren't seams, it'll actually rip. Like, it'll look like the dough is tearing along the sides. So these scores give the bread a place to release the steam, so to speak, like just a little air hole. So yeah, can be for aesthetic purposes if you want. You can make it pretty. I usually just do like 3 stabs through the middle, just like deep enough that you can tell it's gone in the bread. And then yeah, you'll see it does kind of expand out of that as well. So it might need more scores here. And after that has proofed, I actually leave it in the oven and just turn the oven up, and don't take the loaf out. I just turn it right up to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you're gonna wanna bake it for around 26 to 32 minutes, give or take, on your oven, if it's convection, if it's gas. I think it can be convection and gas if it's electric versus gas. I have an electric oven, so it is not as hot. So keep that in mind. You're gonna want the bottom to be like golden enough, but the key part is to be able to knock on top of the dough, and if it sounds like a little bit hollow. Also, you can stab in, neighbors, right? You can stab in with a knife there and see if it is like doughy as well. If you would rather have a printable recipe of this, you can find it on my blog here below. It is 2 pages just with the instructions, and I did put the ingredients on both pages. So if you do just want second page, that is an option. Yeah, thank you so much for stopping by. If you made this recipe, if you end up testing it out, I would love to hear from you, or if you have any critiques, comments, if there's something you would add or change, would love to know. Would love to know. You can interact with me here or directly on my blog. I'm so awkward, so new at this. Just trying to put myself out there, keep going, push through my anxiety every day. All right. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Your boy, I'm gonna new cow book today.